Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. As always, I just want to make sure that actually people can hear, see, and see my screen. So if somebody could pop a message in the chat to say if that's happening, then that would be appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll wait for another few seconds or so until a few more people join, and then we'll get started. Okay then. So, as I said, welcome to the webinar. My name is Sam, as I think as most of you know by this point. I'm the Academy Manager here at Infigo, and one of my roles is to do these webinars more or less on a monthly basis to focus on different parts of the Infigo software that you may not have seen too much of or may not fully understand from the maybe limited resources we've got in that area and so on. So hopefully I'll clarify a few things today. Now, I don't think he's in the webinar quite yet, but we will soon be joined by Duncan. As then many of you will know Duncan from our customer support team. He will be manning the chat again today. So if you do have any questions as we're going through the webinar, I might just, as always, be powering through, just talking and talking, but just put any questions you've got in the chat and Duncan will jump on those. I'll also try. Oh, he is in. Sorry, Duncan, I couldn't see you in the list. Okay, so a quick warning before we start. It's not too bad, but every now and again over the past week or so, my connection has been dropping, like every couple of days. I can get it back usually within 5 minutes, but if I do drop off, then please just, while you're waiting for me to come back on, just bombard Duncan with questions. I'm sure he'll be absolutely fine with it. And he'll get those answered while we're waiting, and I'll be back on as soon as I can. But hopefully that won't happen. Right, in terms of this webinar, so we're going to be looking at a deeper dive into Invent Logic. So that's kind of like a broad term, really. So the webinar is going to be 1 hour maximum, by the way. It could be a little bit shorter based on the resources and content we've got today, but we'll see how we get on. We can always leave a bit of time for another Q&A at the end. So Infigo Logic is a very powerful feature that we've got within Invent, and it allows you to create really versatile product templates to do lots of things, really. But enables you to create dynamic adjustments to your products. You can change the aesthetics, you can change the layout, you can change the functionality based on selections that you make within your user-facing form over on the right-hand side. So, for example, you change one of those form entries from one value to another, that could, in theory, change your entire product that you've got displayed. So that's it in a nutshell. There is a lot more to it than that. Some things that it could potentially do, it allows you to fill in dead space that you've got in your forms. You can hide variables on your forms. You can move and resize different fields on your canvas. Loads of potential things that we'll go through today. Now, there's a few different bits I want to go through today, actually. So when we're saying logic in Invent, the main thing we're talking about is the actual logic screen, which is where you're generating either simple or very complex if statements to do certain things on your product based on certain conditions. But I kind of want to broaden the scope a little bit from that to actually include a few other things, which I think fall under the scope of logic as well. So I want to talk about group spread behavior. So some of you might have seen this. It's the ability to actually automatically fill in white space when you get rid or hide a variable. And I'll show you that in a moment. Variable suppression. So this allows you to automatically hide static text that's associated with a particular variable. And a very short section on parent variables as well, because it gets overlooked a little bit. But we will primarily be focusing on the setup logic page. Now, we do have a few resources that we do have available as part of the webinar. They're available for you to use now if you want to, and they'll be available after the webinar and for the rest of time as well, in case you need them as future reference or future guidance. So I will copy some links into the chat, and then I'll show you what those resources are. Copied quite nicely. So what we've got is a very long web page, which I'm going to be using as my reference today, but don't worry, I won't be just sticking to this. That's got loads of information on it and loads of different animations, imagery, and so forth about different things we're going to talk about today. So this could be a one-stop shop for everything to do with InventLogic. And then associated with that, we've got a couple of products I want to show you as well. Now, one of them, like this one here, is not a pretty product in the slightest. It's very, very, yeah, not great looking, but it makes up for that in functionality. So this is sort of a step-by-step of loads of different configurations of these logic behavior, just to show you the type of things that they can do, type of behavior, and to actually see if it's the sort of thing you want to implement in your own products. And I'll be using this as a reference a lot today as well. And then finally, I've got a bit more of a practical product in here as well. So something a bit better than that, not so good to look at. Reference product, this is actual a business card where we can actually utilize some of the logic and see how we might actually get it to work on a semi-realistic product, let's say. Okay, right, so you've got those links and we're good to go. So let's start off on spread behavior. Now, spread behavior within Invent allows us to control the behavior of a grouped set of fields. So in a nutshell, behavior we can control includes, you can shift fields to fill in gaps that have been created by the hiding of other fields, let's say. You can automatically hide fields based on a master field that they've got specified. And again, I'll show you an example of this. And you can automatically hide fields if their contents are empty. Now let's see a bit of context as to what this actually means. And to actually show you this, I'm just using a product from one of our previous webinars where I've got one of these set up already. So what we've got, I'll show you actually how to set these up in a moment. But we've got a bunch of fields here which are all grouped together. And what it basically means, or what the behavior we want to achieve, is that if I get rid of this email, for example, because we don't want that on our business card, we don't want that same amount of white space. We want the following fields to actually move up to fill that space. And this is what the spread behavior actually does. So if I get rid of that email address, for example, you can see there that the phone number and everything else underneath it automatically goes up to fill the space. And then I put the email address back in, it all shifts back down again. Now, I said another piece of behavior that this could do is it could have a master selection, let's say. So what I mean by that is if we get rid of the master variable, it can also get rid of other variables that are associated with that master. Now, the example we've got here is this phone number. So I've got this T and this phone number as two completely separate fields. I want it so that if I get rid of the phone number, the T automatically disappears as well. And that then leaves space for the address to move upwards into that space. So what we'll see is if I get rid of the phone number, the T moves as well, and that behavior is accomplished. So that gives you a sort of feeling as to what this kind of behavior can do. Now, setting this up is actually really, really simple. So I'm going to jump to InDesign. I realize that the text I've got on here is quite small, but I hope it's okay for everybody. And I'll try and keep the products themselves as large as possible. So let me just find the right products just to show this as an example. Now, as I said, setting this up is really simple. It all revolves around creating groups in InDesign itself. Now, the InDesign bit of functionality, this is not to do with Invent per se. So what you'll see here, for example, is I've got a group. We can create a group just by multi-selecting different fields on our canvas, right-clicking, and then you'll have an option around here which says group. It's always a good idea at that point to actually rename your groups and your fields that are contained within the groups. You don't have to do this. It just makes it much, much easier when you're trying to work with it a little bit later on. So you do that within the Layers tab inside InDesign itself. Just use that to rename the actual group you've created, and the fields that are contained within the group. From there, 2 steps. One of them is to make sure that Invent can actually operate on the individual fields that you've got present within that group. So what that means is going and selecting all of the fields individually that are within that group, going to the Properties tab on Invent, and then making sure that you've enabled each of those. Now, once you've done that, and that is an important step, you can actually go ahead and select the group itself that you've created, and then make sure the group is enabled. Now, you won't be able to do this if you haven't enabled all of the individual fields as well, because Invent needs to be able to operate on all of them if you want them to work with this behavior. Now, when you've enabled that group, there's a few options that you'll have available here, and I'm going to show you loads of different example configurations of these. So in a nutshell, the options here are the ability to specify spread behavior, so vertical and horizontal, or no spread. You've got the ability to modify the arrangement of all the fields within that particular group. And again, I'll show you what this means in a moment. And you've got the ability to specify which of those is a group master. So if you want that to control the behavior of the other fields within the group. So the interface for this is quite simple. And I want to make sure I don't spend too much time going through this one topic. So I'll try and be nice and speedy. So to actually show you this, I'm going to look at our reference product that I've got here. Now, the way I'm going to actually show you this is with 4 options. I've got on each of these different examples of the spread behavior, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, or just 1, 2. And then over on the right-hand side of the form, I've just got a drop-down list, which is either show or hide 1, show or hide 2, show or hide 3, show or hide 4. So hopefully that's quite straightforward. Now let's take a look at what we can kind of accomplish with this. So starting off with no grouping. So this is just the default behavior, no group created inside InDesign. So no spread behavior is being dealt with at all in this case. We're just showing the default capabilities. And what you'll see is that if I start hiding different entries on there, it doesn't have any corresponding impact on the other things, as you would expect, because they're not grouped together. So I can hide any of those, and the other fields will stay in the same place. Now, my next option down is I've got them grouped together, but I've got no master field set, and I've got no spread behavior set. So what I mean by this is I've got no group master specified here, and I've got no spread behavior specified there. And that is essentially the same as not having them grouped at all. So there's no special behavior happening in that particular case. So we can see that exactly the same thing is happening as happened in the first. Now, please let me know if none of this is clear, and I'll try and explain it further, but hopefully this is okay. So the next field down is where we've actually set a master in our Invent file. So the settings for this are something like setting one of those fields as a group master, and then also I've got no spread specified here. So this is the configuration. And then what this is actually doing is it means that that master field is controlling all of the other fields that are within that same group. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 group. So if we keep an eye on this section here, I'll start by hiding 1, which isn't our group master. So that's acting in isolation, as you would expect. 3 will do the same thing. However, if I hide 2, which is set to my master, you can see that has a knock-on effect. And that's actually having this, that's driving the behavior of all of the other fields within the group that aren't set as the master. Okay, so now we start getting to the interesting bit. So we've got spread vertically. Now, 3 kind of similar settings here: spread vertically, spread horizontally, and horizontal and vertical spread. The spread vertically and spread horizontally are fairly self-explanatory, hopefully. What it means is that the only movement that remaining fields will do when one is hidden is either in the specified vertical or horizontal direction. So setting those is just a case of having no group master and then either saying spread vertically or spread horizontally. And what you'll see is if I hide 1 in our spread vertically, for example, number 2 moves up to fill the space. And then with horizontal, you'll see that number 2 moves left to fill the space left by number 1. Now, another thing I should mention here is the fact that the order of the fields is important. So when we're actually in InDesign itself, you'll see we have the ability to move all of the fields up and down in this list. And what we're doing here is controlling the priority between them. So if I had 2 above 1, it would mean that if I hid 2, number 1 would move to fill the gap left by number 2. Whereas because we've got 1 as more important in our example here, it means that number 2 is moving to fill the gap of number 1 when we hide it. So you'll see, for example, in this case, if we hide number 2, number 1 does not move to fill that space because number 1 has the priority. Okay, and we have the horizontal and vertical spread. So this is where it's combining both sets of those behavior. And what it's basically doing is allowing you to move things in a sort of Z-shaped fashion is the best way I can describe it. So this is where we've got, in our spread behavior drop down here, we've got spread vertically and horizontally selected. So it's doing both directions of behavior. And what you'll see is that if I hide number 1, we've got some which move horizontally and some which move vertically, sort of in that Z shape. So number 1 has gone, so number 2 has moved left, number 3 has moved up, and number 4 has moved left. And the same behavior happens if I hide number 3, so number 4 will move up here. Now, I haven't got an example of that reversed behavior, but I have got a little GIF which will show it. So if we do change the behavior of these fields, so in our example, let's say instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 4, 2, 4, 3, 2, 1. What we'll end up getting out of this that's the correct one. Where are we? Here. So you'll see that 4 in this case, because we've reversed that order, is given the priority. So everything is moving towards 4 instead of towards 1. And I hope that makes sense. Okay, and that in a nutshell is the spread behavior. Don't want to spend too long on that, and I know we've already spent 20 minutes, so I do need to speed up. The next thing down is variable suppression. So this is an incredibly useful tool if you've got static text associated with a variable. And you want the behavior of that static text to match what the actual variable is doing. So the example I've got written in here is if let's say our business card again, we've got a telephone number where there is also a static bit of text, which is the T associated with it. Now, this is kind of another way of achieving the same behavior we've already seen, but in this case, both the T and the phone number are in the same text field. They're not two separate text fields. And what this variable suppression will allow you to do is if you get rid of the phone number from the phone number variable, it will also get rid of the static text of the T. Now, there's a couple of different things we can do with this. Let me just show you quickly how this is configured. It's even easier than the one before. So let me go to my example product. So again, on my reference product, I've got a few different examples of this. And the key thing to note here is that you need to have the static text and the variable within that same text field. And you can have multiple static text and multiple variables within the same text field as well, as you can see here. Now, all you need to do to activate this, so if I go to one of my fields, make sure it's enabled in the Properties tab, and then make sure you've got this variable suppression section enabled here. Now, once you've got this enabled, there's 3 options within there. You've got left, you've got right, and you've got full. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't give you a huge wad of detail as to exactly what that does. So I'm on hand to show you what behavior that would achieve for you. Okay, so in my example product, there we go, this one here. So I'm demonstrating this with 3 variables. I've got variable M, so a mobile phone number, variable T, which is a phone number, and variable E, which is an email. And then for all of these examples, they're all contained within the same text box, as I've mentioned, with some associated static text. Now, let's start off with no variable suppression. So this is where this variable suppression setting has not been enabled at all. So it's just the default behavior that you will see inside Invent. And what that basically means is if I get rid of any of those variables, there's no impact on the static text. So you can see there, for example, we've still got the M static text remaining, even though I've got rid of the phone number. If I get rid of the email address, we've still got the E contained within it. Now let's move down to left variable suppression. Now what this will do is it will ensure that any static text to the left of your variable is suppressed when you suppress that particular variable. So for example, if I hide the phone number, you'll see there that the static text M disappears, and so on and so forth. Right variable suppression does a very similar thing, but to the right-hand side of your variable. So I've changed the format here. So instead of the preceding static text, I've now got a following static text. And that will do the same kind of behavior, but to the right-hand side. So if I get rid of my email address, for example, it should also get rid of that static text. Now, the final one we've got here is full variable suppression. Now, the primary use case for this is actually if you're just using separators between different variables. So the example I've got here is that I've got a pipe symbol between my different variables. Now, just left or right suppression won't really do in this case, because you might end up with a leading pipe symbol, which you don't want, or you'll end up with a pipe symbol right at the end, or 2 pipe symbols together, which you don't want. But what full variable suppression allows you to do is ensure that the formatting stays as you would expect. So now, whichever one of these variables I get rid of, I'll always end up with a clean start, clean end, and only 1 pipe separating the different variables. So for example, I'll get rid of the T, and you see that's reformatted itself. If I get rid of the M, it's got rid of all the pipes, so there's none at all. So hopefully that gives you a feeling for what that is capable of. Okay, the final quick thing to show before we do move on to the actual logic screen, so the main part of the webinar, is parent variables. This is a really small section, but it can be very, very useful. It's a great tool for allowing you to control the visibility of certain elements on your Invent form based on the value of another variable within that form itself. So let me show you an example. Easiest again in my reference document. So this isn't actually doing anything on the product itself at all. It's all within the form. So what I've got set up here is a parent variable and a child variable. And what you can see is that when I enable the parent variable, the child variable becomes visible and selectable. However, if I disable the parent variable, the opposite happens. Now, again, setting this up is quite simple. You've just got to know where to do it. So if I go back to Invent, go to my variables, and you'll see in my variables, hopefully, should be quite small on your screen, unfortunately, I've got two variables I've created. One's called parent variable, one's called child variable. You don't need those names. That's just what I'm using for clarity. In order to, and what we're doing here is actually associating one of those variables with a value of the other variable. So if I go into my child variable, what you'll see right at the top of its list of settings there is if you've got this parent section. And you can say enable parent variable, select the variable that you want to associate it with it, or the variable basically that you want to control it, and then you specify under what condition of the parent variable is the child variable going to be visible. Now, in this case, I've just connected it to a Boolean, so it's only going to be true, false. So I can specify here whether the condition to show this variable is the parent is true or the parent is false. It doesn't have to be a Boolean. You can specify it against a drop-down list, for example, where it's visible if a certain value is selected in the drop-down list. Okay, so hopefully that shows that behavior well enough. Right, before we move on to the main section, the logic section, is there any questions on anything we've seen so far? Okay, I'm going to take that as a good sign. I choose to take it as a good sign. Right. So, main section here, the setup logic window. And what this basically allows you to do is to create if statements. Now, I imagine most of you are at least somewhat familiar with if statements. They're quite widely used. In a nutshell, it's basically saying that if a specified condition is met, then a certain action should happen. So this allows you to create really variable forms. And you can scale this a lot. So it can be a really simple variable, a really simple if statement, where it's just one condition, one action. Or you can have it so that there's multiple conditions, multiple actions, and multiple different instances that it's looking at as well. So what we call else statements. And I'll show you that in a moment. Now, there's loads of different things that the if statements can do. I'll show you all the different individual bits of functionality just so you've got clarity on those. But just as an example, it allows you to control the visibility of variables on the user-facing form. So pretty much the same thing that the parent variable can do, just in a different way. You can control the size and position of fields on your actual canvas. You can control the visibility of fields on your canvas. You can change the values of variables in the user-facing form based on other variable values. You can change the font. You can change the image of things that are on your actual canvas. Loads of different potential things. And when you add all of these together, you've got the power to create really, really variable options on your products. So let me just show you an example on this product here that I've made. So it's all well and good seeing it in individual bits and pieces, as we'll do in a moment. But I've set this up. It's not a perfect product by any means, but it gives you an example of what this kind of functionality can do. So what I've set up is a business card. And we're working on the assumption that this company has two completely different styles of, well, Infigo has two completely different styles of layout of the cards that they can actually work with. So I've got it all linked to this one drop-down box here. If I change from standard to QR, the entire layout will change. Fields are hidden, fields are moved around, fields are shown, variables are shown and hidden inside the fields themselves, all from changing that one statement. Now, there's other things present in here as well to do with logic, smaller logic statements, but this is the sort of big one where there's loads of stuff happening, and that's all done in one single, quite complex if statement that I'll show you a bit later on. It'll show you the kind of capabilities that you can have. Right. So let's go back to basics with this, just in case anyone's not that familiar with the if statements. So we'll start off just by showing you what the logic screen is and where you would find it. So if you go into your Invent tab inside InDesign, go to the Variables tab, and then amongst these buttons you've got at the top of the screen, you've got the Setup Logic button. That will open up a separate window when my laptop cooperates. Now, I've got a lot of statements and rules and stuff already set up in here. You'll start off with something very, very empty in here. And what you say is add logic. That will create you the start of a new if statement. And all you're doing is you're putting in the name and description, just so you know what this is actually controlling. And in a nutshell, you're creating conditions. And this could be sort of if a variable is set to a certain value. So I'll just do one as an example. If one of my variables, let's say child variable, equals one of the options that the child variable can be, then a certain action will happen. And this action can be a lot of different things, as we've talked about. So it can be modifying one of the variables again, or it can be modifying one of the fields that are actually on your canvas. There's loads of things it can modify that we'll show you. So for example, I could say, let's say my parent variable is hidden, for example. Now, an important thing to note when you're actually creating these if statements, especially if you're brand new to it, is you do need to round out the statement. So even if this is my critical thing here, so if my child variable is set to 1, I want to hide the parent variable, we also need to specify what happens in the opposite state. So at the moment, this is kind of an open-ended statement. It's only looking at one particular thing and isn't covering the alternative. And we do this with an else. So we can say add else at the bottom of the screen here, and that's just giving us the action if this condition is not met. So basically it's covering all the bases. It makes sure that we're covering all potential conditions. So in this case, I might say that the parent variable is to be shown. And that would cover everything in our basic if statement. Now, let's look at these in increasing order of complexity. So we're going to start off with some of the general capabilities. And I've actually just set up an example of this. So single conditions and single actions. So one condition is met, one action happens, or else we have an opposite state, let's say. Now, I won't show you how to make that because I've just done so I won't repeat myself. But just to show you that in operation, so single conditions and actions. One example of this in operation is just if I change to a certain value in this drop-down list, it will show me one logo. Otherwise, it will show me another logo. So nice and easy. And how that looks in our actual product. If our condition equals Infigo, then my action is going to be set a certain image, alternatively set another image. And I'll show you these capabilities a little bit later on. I'm just going through the ability to do actions in different degrees. All right, the next one down is the ability to do multiple conditions and multiple actions. So if a single condition can work, that's all well and good. That's great. However, in many situations, you might have it that multiple conditions have to be met to perform a certain action. Or it might be that if you change one condition, multiple actions happen. So like we saw on our business card there, I changed one condition, which was that variable value. And as a result, about 50 things changed in the actual actions list. So this is possible as well. And you can combine that to multiple conditions and multiple actions in one statement. So our example we've got here is we've got two drop-down lists. So one which is saying, do we want a logo? And one which is saying to select a brand, which only has one option in it at the moment. And what we're showing here is one condition, but multiple actions. So if I change my logo to say, I don't want a logo, that has two resulting actions. So it's hidden the logo on the actual canvas itself, and it's also hidden the variable field, which is present in the form here. And how that's set up is something like this. So this actually does have multiple conditions set up, but it doesn't specifically need it. So that's saying that if these conditions are met, then we're performing multiple actions. In the alternate condition, so if that particular conditions are not met, then we're performing this action. And again, I hope this is making sense. Please put questions in if you need some clarification. One other thing to mention about multiple conditions is the ability to specify whether it's an and condition or an or condition. So what this means is if you've got multiple conditions, so let's say variable 1 was set to A and variable 2 was set to B. It can be an and condition, so both of those have to be met in order to get the actions to work. Alternatively, you can have it set to or. So if either of those conditions are met, then the action will be followed. And again, it's up to you under which condition you need those to be in. And the final option here, the final general thing to show is this else and else if. So I've shown you else as in the alternate condition. But what if there's multiple different scenarios? There's not just sort of like it can be this or this. In many situations, it can be multiple different options, especially when you have a few different variables it's associated with. So I've got some examples here. Keep your eye on this box here with the else and else if. What we've got is a box which is do you want a logo, a box which is select the sub-brand, so either just Infigo or the Infigo Academy, and then select the logo color, so it can be full color or white. Now, this is multiple different conditions associated with each other, so just one yes or no solution is not going to really cut it. If I start playing around with those, you can see there's a lot of different potential things that this can be. And the way in which we make those, this is where the if statements start to get a little bit more lengthy when you're creating them. So we start by specifying our initial if conditions and actions. But then instead of just clicking, so if I scroll down to the bottom of this for now, instead of just clicking add else, which is the last statement, we instead say add else if. And this allows us to put in an additional configuration with a new set of conditions and a new set of actions. Just remember that we'll always need an else right at the end, just to sort of close out the statement for any conditions that have not been covered in the previous statements. So if we start to look at what this is doing, we've got our initial if, conditions and actions, else if, that covers a different set of conditions and then resulting actions, more else ifs, and then an else to finish it and sort of round out the entire statement. So you can see the basic methodology is still exactly the same. You're still creating just conditions and actions, but when you start to get more complicated conditions, it starts to get a bit more of a lengthy process to start to put these together. Okay, so that's it for our general sort of conditions. What I want to cover now, which I don't think will take too long, to be honest, is the different things that we can actually do with our fields themselves. So the different things we can modify on the fields using our logic from within the if statements. So I've got examples of each of these. Some of them are very simplistic and will take about 30 seconds to go through. Some have got a couple of extra things and options I want to show you. So we'll start off with a really basic one. We've got show or hide. Really, really simple. All that's doing, and I've just linked this to a Boolean value just to keep it nice and simple. All that will do is show or hide the entire field. So it doesn't just sort of empty the field, it actually does hide the field completely once it's in MegaEdit. Configuring this, nice and easy. So all you want to do is specify your condition, which will be the change of one of the variables. Doesn't have to be a Boolean, it can be whatever you want it to be. But then the resulting action, you're going to make sure that you're selecting a field that's within your template. Now, actually, a point of note before we continue here. If you've not renamed all of the fields within your Invent template, this is where it can get quite confusing because each of those fields will just have an ID, and differentiating them from one another is going to drive you a bit mad. So what I would recommend is making sure that in your layers tab inside InDesign that you've just renamed all the fields that you actually want to drive using Invent. Makes it much, much easier. So select the field you want to control, and then from the resulting list, all we want to do is switch between show and hide. And that's it for those two. That will result in that behavior for us. So one of your conditions will be show, the else condition will be hide. That one's nice and simple. Next one down is set size. Now, I've got this set up really simply. So again, it's a It's a Boolean value, and it's just saying that if I've got the Boolean ticked, it's going to be one size. If it's unticked, it's going to be another. But of course, you can make it more complicated than this. You can link it to drop-down variables and various other things to actually have greater control over what this size change is going to do. But you can see there the kind of thing it's doing. It's just taking that entire field and it's resizing the entire field to what you specify it to be. So let me show you the options that we have available when specifying this. There's a few more options for this one. So again, we start off with our conditions. We specify our actions where we specify one of our fields, and then we go to set size. Now there's a few different options we have in here. So we have the ability to just modify the height in isolation, the width in isolation, or the height and the width. And if you specify any of those, you then get the resulting option to be able to either do absolute height, width, or both, or a relative height, width, or both. So absolute will just be you specify what that size is going to be. Relative is a relative change from the current size. So for example, I've just got width specified here as absolute, so my width is going to be 100. Another thing we have in here is the ability to actually match existing fields. So if you don't want to sort of specify individual heights and widths, so if I go to match field, you can specify another enabled field, which is on your canvas. And then you've got additional options in there. So then you can say, okay, well, I want this to match the width of that field, or the height, or the width and the height. We also have some additional text options in there as well. So if these are text fields, you have the ability to base those changes on the actual text within the fields and control the text within the fields rather than just the fields themselves. So text width, text height, text width, height. Okay, now, something I should probably note to the developers, actually, this doesn't have a unit on there. I think this is, if it's the same as position, I think it's a point value. Yes, I'll confirm that, but I think it's a point value. So when you're actually specifying a value in here, make sure that, and if you're referencing your actual InDesign product, make sure that you've got the same units specified in InDesign as well. Otherwise, it's going to start getting quite confusing. You probably know how to do this. Most of you probably know InDesign a lot better than I do. But just to show where you can change those units if you need to, if I can remember. So if I go to Edit, Preferences, and then Units and Increments, I can change my units as necessary. So for example, if I change this to points, click on OK, and then click on one of those fields. If I go to the Properties tab, I can now see what the height and width of that particular field is in point values, which is what MegaEdit is going to use. Right, so the next one down is set position. Similar in many ways to set size. But that gives you the ability to actually change the position of a field based on your variable selection. Now, again, mine is very simple. I've just linked it to a Boolean value, but you've got much greater control over this if you need it. So setting this up is similar again. And the available controls you've got are similar to set size as well. So set position. So choose your field, choose set position, and then the result we've got in there is the ability to choose the Y position, the X position, the X and Y position. If you choose those, again, as with the set size, you've got the ability to choose absolute. So the absolute position on the canvas of that particular field, or you can do relative. So that's relative to where it starts off its position. You'll see as well that we do have the ability again to match field. So if you want to move something to where another field is, you can choose the field you want to match it to, and then specify whether it's the X position, the Y position, or the X and Y position you want to match it against. Now, something I picked up whilst creating this template, which Duncan very kindly helped me out with, is where you have to measure from in terms of this position. This is very important. So when you're going off MegaEdit, the position we're measuring from is the top left position of the actual field itself. And you want to make sure that instead of if you're getting those measurement values from InDesign in terms of where you want to move things from and move things to, you want to measure from the same location. Now, again, this is something that most of you probably know how to do, but I'll just show you. So if I go to, let's just select our field. If I'm on my Properties tab inside InDesign, and again, sorry, that will be very small text for you guys. It's InDesign itself. You've got this little icon here, which is showing you where it's measuring that position from on your actual canvas. If you're getting a reference from InDesign to use in Invent, you want to make sure that you've got top left specified as your reference point. And then you can use those X and Y positions safely. Okay, I think that's everything on there. Right, so next one down is set image. This is a lot simpler. So this basically just allows us to choose the image that's present within the field itself. Now, one thing I should note is that a lot of these things I'm showing you can be done in other ways inside Invent. So basic Invent 101 really is the ability to drive images based on a dropdown. This is just another way of accomplishing the same thing, But if you're doing it as part of an if statement, it means you can combine it with lots of other things as well if you need to do so. So as well as changing the image, you can also change the position or change the size in one operation. So keep in mind that there are other ways in which you can do that. So change image, much easier to operate than the previous two. So set image. So choose your field, choose set image, and then you've got options as to where to get this image from. So you can have it so it's linked to one of your variables if you want to. So if you had a variable, I don't in my case, if I had a variable that was using or linked to a clipart resource, I could have it so that the image that was being shown, is what that variable was currently set to. Alternatively, you can have it where it's picking a specific image. So instead of variable, I can say, look into my resource sets. So I think most of you will be familiar with resource sets. It's just where you create sort of predefined libraries of text, of clip arts, of spot colors, that kind of thing. So in this particular product, we've got a sort of clip art library already defined. Trying to focus through the terrible jokes, guys. Come on. Let's see. So set image. So in this case, I've got it linked to a specific resource. I can choose the resource, so I've got a choice of which one I go through, and then I can choose a specific image from within that resource. So I can drive specific images based on the condition that it's in. So you can see in our case, in this example, it's just driving between two specific images. Now we might just about finish this on time, to be honest. So set background color. Again, quite self-explanatory in what it does. It allows you to actually drive the background color of the entire field that it's associated with. Our simple example is, again, just driving between two colors. You can make it more detailed as you see fit. How we specify those. Choose set background color when we're defining our action after we've chosen one of our fields. And again, you have the choice of how you choose the color you want to drive it to. You can do it as a variable, so it's based on another variable that you've got present within your product. Or you can have it as a resource. So the same way as we saw with the image, we can drive from a resource set, so a color resource set that we've got defined in our system already. So let's say we have a brand colored resource set, we can drive it that way. But with color, you can also just manually specify what the color is as well. So if I set that as color specification, say select color, we can then either specify it as RGB or we can specify it as CMYK. And we've got the addition of actually specifying this as a spot color as well, if we wish to do so. Nice and simple, hopefully. Next one down is the ability to set text. So this gives you the ability to actually drive text into one of your fields using an if statement. So in our example, we're just simply specifically changing between two text strings based on our checkbox. But again, you can drive it based on resources. You can drive it based on variables, I would think. We'll have a look in a moment. Or you can manually specify what the text is going to be. Now, again, you can do this using Invent 101 just by configuring a variable linked to a text box. This is just giving you the capability to do this as part of a larger if statement. So choose your field, choose set text, and then your options in here are linked to a variable, link to a resource. So remember that we can have a resource set, which is a text library. So let's say, for example, you've got a long list of potential addresses or something. You could choose a value from within that address resource. Or, as we've done here, you can specify a specific static value to choose from. Now, I've bunched a couple of things together in one for this next one. So we do have the ability to set the font and some associated font formatting values as well. So we can do font size and we can do font color as part of the if statements. So as part of the example, you can see there I've got one which changes the size, changes the color, and changes the font. Specification, again, is super simple. So as we're changing multiple things, this is a little bit more of a complex if statement, which has multiple actions. So I've got 3 actions present, all operating on the same field. So you can have multiple actions operating on the same field. You're not limited to one on one field. One of them is setting the font, one the font color, and one the font size. For setting the font, we have the ability to choose between a font resource set, which is again another option, where we can predefine loads of different fonts we want available in our product, and then we can choose from that available resource. Alternatively, if we've got a variable created, which is linked to a font resource set, we can define it based on a variable as well. Font color, you get the same set of options that you had available for the background color selection. So you can drive it based on variable, resource, or manually specify a color where you can choose it as RGB or CMYK. And then we've got set font size, where again, we can drive it from a variable. So if you've got a number variable, which is controlling your font size, you can do it that way, or you can specify a specific value. Now, the final one here, as I was setting up an example for this, I came across a slight problem with it. So I can't show you it right now, but it is going to be fixed very, very soon. This gives you the ability to set the text mode. And what this essentially does, so if I just load up the pop-up window here. Oh, I'm not logged in as an administrator, so I can't. But basically, there's a few options in that details tab there, which allows you to say whether it's fixed text, which would mean that the end user can't modify the text in the field at all. You can specify whether there's no rich formatting. So that will remove the ability for the customer to use the rich text formatting options within that field. Or you can specify no formatting at all. So it won't allow the customer to modify any formatting inside that field. All of the things that you can drive from the actual invent logic are basically just choosing text boxes, choosing Boolean values within that details tab to control those individual things. So the configuration of that one is, again, super simple. On my actions, I choose a field, say set text mode, and I've got those 4 options to choose from. Normal is your default, and then there's those other 3 potential options that I'm showing you there. Ooh, okay. That was timed a bit better than I thought. So hopefully that wasn't speeding up towards the end. Okay, so one thing I did want to mention, I apologize if you do have to drop off at the end of the hour. I won't be more than a few more minutes, but this is recorded and will be put on the Academy. This isn't relating to logic, but a new nice bit of functionality that we've got is the ability to actually generate barcodes from within Invent. So you'll see here that I've got my QR code section. That actually is a QR code which has been generated from within Invent itself. And it can be used as a V card as well. There's numerous things you can populate with that barcode with whatever you want to populate it with. But we do have some specific templates as well, which will allow you to specify it as a V card. And the kind of thing I can do here is put in different address information, phone numbers, names, and so on as part of the configuration and link those to variables. And what it means is that you're welcome to do that. If you scan the QR code there, it will automatically register those contact details in your phone. Now, obviously, I haven't got time to show you how to set that up right now. It is very, very simple. And there is a video on the Infigo Academy, which will show you how to do this. But in a nutshell, it is very, very straightforward. You just add a field in there, and then within the properties menu, instead of just saying true or false, so this is enabled, you've now got the option to choose whether it's static, image, or barcode. When you choose barcode, you get some additional options here which allow you to control the different information that make up that barcode. And you're not limited to just QR codes. You've got loads of different types of barcode you can make as well. But again, there's a video on the Infigo Academy if you want to learn more about that. Okay, so that is more or less it. Just to let you know about the next webinar, it will be, as I know, in about a month's time, so about the middle of next month. The planned topic for that one is going to be probably a little less relevant to most, but it might be quite interesting. It's to do with MegaEdit's 3D capabilities. So it's a large beast to cover, so I won't be able to do it all. So it's more an introduction to MegaEdit 3D, which might be a point of interest to a few of you, even if you don't have the module at present. But apart from that, I think that's everything. This recording will be put on the Academy. You're welcome to keep hold of the resources or bookmark them for future use. And as I mentioned, on the actual resources as well, which I don't think I did mention, on the landing pages for those resources, you can download the InDesign files. You can download the MEX files as well if you want to see how they were configured. So everything is there if you want to use those as a reference. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. So thank you very much, guys, for listening. I hope it's been useful. If you have any questions, please do put them in the questions panel, and we'll stick around for a few minutes to try and answer those. Apart from that, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you next time. Hello, I'm back again, just to answer that question that's just come in. So the question is, I hope everyone can see and hear me, is there a way to utilize the InDesign layers within the logic, or perhaps pre-design some layouts that we can use with the logic to affect template layouts? So at the moment, you don't use the InDesign layers. So on one of my products that I showed you, I have separated things into layers inside InDesign just to make it easier to figure out what it's doing and to make sure that all the different fields are separated. At the moment, Invent will not utilize those as such. There is stuff to do with the layouts and the layers, both on the Invent roadmap for future releases, I believe, but they're not available at the moment. So what I've done in mine is I've kind of utilized the Invent logic to actually to change the layout. So that's what it's doing. The Invent logic is showing and hiding things to actually completely change the layout. That's just one example of how I've used it. And at the moment, that's a viable way to do it. Soon, hopefully, inside Invent, there will be the ability to actually create layouts and utilize layouts. So you might not have to use logic for that, but you'll still be able to use logic for other things. Okay, hope that one helps. Okay, so are you separating each field in its own layer, or can you do both groups of fields? So what I've got, let me just show you what I've actually got in my setup. Just hopefully that will make a bit more context-wise. Okay, so this is the product I set up that I showed you, where you change in that drop down list, and it sort of completely switches the layout of the actual business card. The way I've actually set this up, which doesn't really impact Invent, is that I've got the different layers, but I'm using that just to actually tell me the different layouts that I want. So my individual statements are going to be to show and hide different fields within there. In terms of the groups, they don't have to be, if you want to use it for the spread behavior and the suppression that we showed early on, the groups don't have to be in the individual layers. You just want to group them together. So I think I've got one here, for example. All I've done is selected a few of those together, right-clicked, and said group those together. They don't have to be in a separate layer. Yeah, is that right? Cool. Okay, any more questions? Keep those coming in. Just going to turn my screen off again for a second.